Hello, everyone, and welcome to Toronto Apologetics. My name is Tony Costa, and today I will be continuing answering questions about Christmas. Today, we're going to be discussing what is probably the most commercial, probably the most well-known icon and figure that most people in the secular world think of when they think of Christmas, and that is, of course, Santa Claus. And so I want to talk today about the figure that we know as Santa Claus and where that figure came from and why that figure has become such a part of Western commercialization during Christmas time. And so we want to take a look at the history of Santa Claus and how he came about. Now, in order to understand the idea of Santa Claus, we need to go way, way back to the 4th century, and we need to consider this important figure in church history by the name of Saint Nicholas. Saint Nicholas was the bishop of Myra, which was a city in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, and he was born approximately AD 270, and he died in AD 343. The date of his death is believed to have been December the 6th, AD 343, and that is why today in the Christian calendar, you will notice that December 6th is a day that is generally dedicated to Saint Nicholas. It is his feast day, and usually this would be marked by the day of their death. And so when a Christian was martyred or they had died, that death date usually would be recorded as the date to remember them by. And so that day would be associated with that person. And so in the case of Nicholas, because he had died on December 6th, 343, December 6th has been known throughout Christian history, at least in the Christian calendar as we know it, as St. Nicholas's Day, or the day dedicated to St. Nicholas. So we begin with Nicholas, and you will see how the Santa Claus figure evolved out of this, how this Santa Claus figure developed from this 4th century Christian leader. There's also a story that we're not exactly sure about, but some historians will say that it's possible that Nicholas may have been present at the First Ecumenical Council in AD 325, which was the Council of Nicaea, a very important council, considered again the First Ecumenical Council. And there's a story that some believe may be legendary that Nicholas walked across the aisle and slapped Arius of Alexandria in the face. And the idea there being that Arius was the grand heretic who denied the full deity of Christ and taught that the Son of God had a beginning, that there was a time, he said, when he was not, when the Son did not exist. And therefore the church condemned that view, called today Arianism, as a heresy. And so if that's the case, then of course, Nicholas was a defender of orthodoxy. Now, what's his connection with what later would become Santa Claus? We know that Nicholas he came from a wealthy family. His father and mother both were wealthy. And we know that he had a very generous spirit in the terms of giving gifts and valuable items to people who were poor, particularly the poor. And there is a story of Nicholas granting or giving to a pious Christian man who had 3 daughters. Because of his poverty, the girls were in danger of being sent out into prostitution. And so Nicholas gave dowries actually to the father, dowries so that they could be married off to people who could provide for them and so forth. And in other words, he saved these 3 girls from poverty and from going into prostitution. Now, we need to understand that the person of Santa Claus is actually a composite figure. What do I mean by this? He begins to develop. So this tradition of St. Nicholas being a giver of gifts and showing charity and love to the poor and so forth made its way into Western Europe, into Holland, for example. And in Holland, St. Nicholas was called Sinterklaas. Sinterklaas. And Sinterklaas is the Dutch name for this figure. You could see the roots here of Saint Nicholas. You notice the bishop's mitre, his hat, for example, the bishop's hat. You will also notice the bishop's staff that he carries and so forth. And so in Holland, the idea was that this figure who was connected to St. Nicholas and was called Sinterklaas is a figure who would give gifts to children. It's this figure where you begin to see him coming down chimneys and so forth, and putting little gifts in the little wooden clogs of the children, of course, wooden clogs being very common in Holland. And so this was very widespread in the country of Holland. And when the Dutch began to move across the Atlantic, for example, in the early 17th century, in the early 1600s, the Dutch settled in the southern tip of Manhattan in New York and founded that area as New Amsterdam. So the Dutch had colonized there in the southern tip of Manhattan and not only called it New Amsterdam, but remained there. They were basically the center of the colonial center of the Dutch government. Now, in 1664, when the English had come to the Americas, the English took over New Amsterdam and they renamed it, and you guessed it, they named it New York. And that is the name of not only the city there today, but it's also become the name of the entire state of New York. And it was called New York after the Duke of York. And so you could see first the Dutch influence in New Amsterdam. And then, of course, you see the English influence coming later in renaming that area New York, which it still bears that name to this day. And so why do I say this? Well, because the figure of Sinterklaas came across into North America through the Dutch, through the Dutch colonials. So when the Dutch were colonizing the Americas, they brought these traditions with them. So they would have Sinterklaas and the idea of giving gifts to children and the idea of coming down the chimneys and so forth. Well, this idea of Sinterklaas, when the English came, of course, the English also had their traditions of St. Nicholas as well. And it's here that we begin to see the development of Old St. Nick. And it's with Old St. Nick that we begin to see the figure of the modern day commercialized Santa Claus. And so he's known by various names. Old St. Nick, he's also known as Kris Kringle and Father Christmas as well, or in French, Pierre Noël. And you can see how all of this begins to develop. So notice the connection to Nicholas is still there. You see the word Old St. Nick, Nick being short for Nicholas. And of course, if you look at the word Santa Claus, the word Santa means saint, and Claus is short for Nicholas. And so the term Claus is the ending of the word Nicholas. You see this as well in the Dutch with the word Klaas at the end, Sinterklaas, Saint Claus, Saint Nicholas. And so with the rise of Santa Claus as Old Saint Nick and and how he becomes associated with gift giving and so forth, you begin to see the commercialization of Santa Claus, particularly in America. And you will also notice that it is also the company Coca-Cola that later adopted that figure of Santa Claus. They weren't the ones who created that figure, but they did adopt him, and they used Santa Claus as a major proponent for advertising for Coca-Cola. And it's also not surprising that the colors of Coca-Cola are red and white, just like Santa Claus's costume is red and white. And so unfortunately, Santa Claus, who is a dim shadow of the ancient St. Nicholas, who evolved and developed and became a composite figure, became associated with the commercialism that we find in the West today. And so, as you can see, the figure of Santa Claus today, when you think of Santa Claus, you think of gifts, you think of children sitting on his lap at the shopping malls, and you think of children looking forward to Christmas Eve or Christmas Day when Santa Claus would come and give his gifts to the children. And again, that tradition, as I said, also comes from Holland, the practice of Christmas in Holland with Sinterklaas. Now, here's the point. A lot of parents struggle, particularly Christian parents struggle with the idea of, do we tell our children that Santa Claus is real or not real? And here we need to be very careful, because to teach children that there is this man who lives up in the North Pole, and he lives there with a band of elves, and these elves are busy throughout the year making all these gifts so Santa Claus can go out with flying reindeer, mind you, with magical reindeer where he can fly up through the sky and so forth, and go around the world and dropping gifts and so forth and so on, going through chimneys. Again, that comes from Holland. We need to be very careful here, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to detract from the center of Christmas, which is the birth of Jesus Christ. We do not want to decentralize Jesus Christ. We want to centralize Jesus Christ. He is the reason for the season, and he's the center of all things. Now, what do we do with Santa Claus? Well, I think with Santa Claus, it's important to teach our children, not to mislead them into thinking that this figure really lives, and he lives forever. You know, he's immortal. He doesn't die. He lives in the North Pole, and he's immortal. He doesn't age and die like everyone else. We need to be careful here, because let's face it, at the end of the day, you are misleading your children into believing something that's not true. And for Christians, truth is a central aspect of our faith. We follow the one who claimed to be the truth. And therefore, to make children believe something, remember, children are very impressionable, but children also know the difference between for real and pretend. They know the difference between pretending and something that is real. And so what I have advised parents is that you should never take Christ away from the center during the Christmas season. And secondly, you want to tell them that the figure of Santa Claus is a figure that is pretending. That is to say, a figure that is based on a real Christian in history, a faithful Christian who cared about the poor, who gave to those who did not have. And so the idea of giving at Christmas, the idea of giving to those who are less fortunate, has its roots in Christianity. Not Santa Claus, but in the historical Nicholas, the historical St. Nicholas, Bishop of Myra. And so I think it's important that we keep that balance very carefully held, that we need to let our children know that Jesus is the reason for the season, and tell them that Santa Claus is one of those, is part of the world of pretend, and that he's actually a figure that is based on a real historical figure in history that was a faithful servant of Jesus Christ. And so it doesn't help to make our children think that Santa Claus is a real existing figure. People say, well, they're just children, but children, again, children believe their parents before anyone else. And therefore, it's important for us to be truthful. It's no different than telling children about the tooth fairy, that if you lose your teeth and you place your tooth under a pillow, the tooth fairy is going to come and put money there and take your tooth. And no one ever asked the question how the tooth fairy became so wealthy. I mean, who is she selling these teeth to? But all kidding aside, I think it's important to realize Santa Claus was deliberately created. The old Saint Nick was deliberately created as a commercial prop. We saw that with the Coca-Cola company. And today, let's face it, today, these big businesses out there, retail stores, their hottest time of the year is Christmas. And they're not doing it because of Jesus Christ. They're doing it for the almighty dollar. And so the message of Christmas is the very opposite of that. It's not about accumulating wealth to yourself, but giving of yourself to others, being selfless, not selfish, being like Christ, who emptied himself and became a servant, became a slave, so that he could give us, so that, as the Bible says, he who was rich rather, became poor, so that we, through his poverty, might become rich to God. And therefore, we need to keep these things in balance. And we need to let our children know where Santa Claus comes from. And we also need to make them aware that this is simply a figure that is pretend based on this ancient Christian figure. And so, folks, I hope that this has been helpful. I hope that this has helped to clarify some things, especially those of you who are parents with little children. And once again, it's a call for us to look at the evidence, to see where these ideas come from, but most importantly, to keep Christ at the center of all things, because as Colossians 1:18 says, in all things, he must have the preeminence. He must be supreme over all. Thanks for joining us, and look forward to seeing you again. Don't forget to like and to subscribe to this video, and share it with others and let others know about this channel. Take care and God bless. Bye for now.